In Finland, 12 years in a row, homelessness has decreased.
Yes, that is correct. The number is 3,429 homeless people. Around 70% are staying with their friends and relatives.
Well, Finland's a small country.
When I looked San Francisco, it's not that much bigger city compared to Helsinki, for example, regarding the population. Not that much. And compared the number of homeless people.
Oof.
We have 10,000 studies about housing first and how it's effective and actually can end homelessness and actually saves money while doing it on the long run. But you know, people are selfish, out of sight, out of mind. When we started Housing First 2008, we didn't renovate vacant buildings, but we renovate almost all the shelters and temporary accommodation into permanent homes for people. So I think we need to work what we got.
In the United States, they've never scaled housing first with the adequate support services. Finland was providing the formerly homeless person with something to do, creative ways to give people purpose.
Also proven to be a really good way to do the harm reduction work. Do I open this beer or do I have something to do? We have so many discussions, we have so many visions, we have so many strategy papers, we have so many words that basically tells the path where we should be going. Now we just need the action part because we're not going to end homelessness without action.
Finland's goal is to eradicate homelessness in a couple of years. I know, you think it can't be done. Link below to our documentary highlighting their great work. And that's where we first met Juha. We also went and handed out socks with him in San Francisco. Another fun video to watch, but this interview is more of a deep dive on how Finland is preventing and solving homelessness.
First, I want to thank you for helping us with the documentary. You connected us to the right people. Everybody helped us make that such a powerful documentary.
No worries. I'm glad you came and did it. And yeah, I think it turned out to be a great documentary. And there's a lot of positive feedback coming from Finland that it shows the reality of what we are actually doing. So yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask, for people that don't know, we'll put the link to the documentary. Yeah. So how was the feedback?
It has been really positive from everywhere from Finland, I would say, and especially like what you have promoted as well, that it tells the truth about the housing first. It doesn't show the fancy apartments and people smiling all the time or anything like that, but it shows that, you know, it can be different. Yeah, it can be messy apartments, it can be clean apartments and everything between, and that's what makes, I think, the documentary really valuable. It shows the whole variety of the work.
And it was important to me that we tell the authentic story.
Yeah.
And grateful to the Blue Ribbon Foundation that they wanted us to tell that story.
Yeah.
Which shows the culture of accountability and openness, right? It shows a culture of transparency.
Yeah, of course.
And it really got me thinking, because here in America, we always show the well-behaved homeless person in a very nice apartment. And we say, look, we're solving homelessness. Yet the public sees people with mental illness and drug addiction. And I think there's a disconnect because it's not magic, right? You just don't go, here's my magic wand, and the person, you know, is nice and clean in a nice apartment. Some people take a long time to get better, and some people don't get better.
Exactly, yeah.
But you've ended their homelessness, and being in housing is their best chance to get better.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Yeah, that is the truth.
And we walked around here in San Francisco a bit.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts? What I was going to do is connect, because we saw a lot of people with mental illness. We saw a lot of people using drugs. And if we were able to get them inside with support, I know here in San Francisco and many places in the United States, they've never scaled housing first with the adequate support services to really have a significant impact.
Yeah, and I think that has been one of the main things that I have read in Finland when there has been critique towards housing first here in the US. And I think the critique is towards the housing only model, because they never talk about the support. They just give someone apartment and then, nothing happens basically, and sooner or later the people are back on the streets. I think the people we saw on the streets with the right kind of tailor-made support, they would be just fine in their own homes.
Yeah. And that was a big difference, or is a big difference, that what I noticed in Finland, it was very focused on the person. So here in the United States, politicians want to get housing numbers up. And they're under pressure. The public wants to see homeless people gone. So then politicians put pressure on, program or service providers to get as many in housing as possible. So often people get put into apartments and the infrastructure for support isn't there.
Yeah.
And this often isn't the fault of the nonprofit. There just isn't the right housing stock. So they're placed in apartments that are in a bad neighborhood or, have bed bugs and mold and are just, horrible places. And then the people go back outside.
Yeah, and I don't blame them.
Yeah.
Yeah, for doing that. And I think when we were handing out socks in Tenderloin, there was this one guy who was there hanging out on the street, and then we asked the question that how long you have been there, and he said that, I have an apartment right there.
Yeah.
But he has been homeless for so long that he couldn't stay in the apartment for longer periods. Yeah. So he just hang out on the streets, and then when the dark comes, he goes to his home and spend a night there in a safe place. But I think that tells so much.
It's a important story, especially here in America. A big percentage of homelessness is people coming out of prisons and jails. And they've spent so much time inside in a prison cell that to put them in an apartment can be challenging.
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
It can reinforce. So what I've seen is if we created housing with open spaces where they could hang out outside, right? Because they want to be outside. We see the same thing with indigenous populations in Canada because they're going to go inside at night to sleep, right? It's so important.
It is, and I think that's something we actually have done in Finland on a certain pace. The Salvation Army housing unit that you saw when you were visiting us, and there's a big inner yard in that building, and there's a barbecue spot and all these kind of things. So I think those are really important. And then also inside the building, there's these big communal areas where you can hang out, so you don't have to stay in your apartment whole time. So I think those kind of solutions are really needed.
What really stood out to me was that in Finland, part of the model was providing the formerly homeless person with something to do. And I remember the one place, it paid like €8, which isn't a lot, but it didn't cancel out their disabilities.
Yeah.
Because also here we have income requirements that would cancel out their disability insurance. So it was everything from sweeping the floor to wood shop working, to doing like mailings or crafts. And one place even had a recording studio.
Yeah. They do different kind of music there. I think mainly rap music nowadays, but there is, drums and guitars and basses and everything between, so people can go there and rehearsal, and when they feel like it, they can record something if they want.
Not every place can have a recording studio, but you can figure out creative ways to give people purpose.
Yeah, exactly. And I think those low threshold work activities that you just mentioned, I think they are a vital part of the work we are doing. And then it has also proven to be a really good way to do the harm reduction work. Because like you said, it gives people meaningful things to do during the day. And the first thing from many people, it can be that, do I open this beer or do I have something to do? Right. And if there's work downstairs, the decision can be that, hey, I open this beer later and now I got to do some work. And then, like you said, there are many different opportunities, but then I also like that it's not only the work that they are doing inside the unit, but there's also, private companies that the units are connected, and the private companies order different kind of work activities from the unit, and then, people get to feel like, hey, I'm working for that company, and I think it makes a huge difference.
Now, the organization you work for, Y Foundation,
Yeah.
is really a affordable housing developer.
Yeah.
And it really stood out because we went to Finland to tell the story of housing first. And I remember interviewing you in your offices, and you're talking about affordable housing. And I went, wow, this is so much more than just housing first.
Yeah, that is correct. And I think we believe that affordable housing is part of housing first, because you cannot have housing first without having the housing first, actually. So I think that's really important. And at the Y Foundation, of course, we build all the time new affordable homes for people, not just for homeless people, but also those who are on the edge of becoming homeless, and then low-income people, single parents, people working in the service industry, and so on. So I think it's really important that we do these kind of actions as well, because what we have learned in Finland is that the affordable housing is the best structural element against homelessness. So that's why we keep building more affordable homes in Finland, and that has proven to be the right path.
And the country has a commitment to a certain amount of affordable housing.
Yeah, it depends on the city, but I think the capital city, Helsinki, is a good example that whenever there's a new living area coming up, it doesn't matter if it's on the city center, on the seaside, on a waterfront, whenever the goal is to have at least 25% of affordable housing so that we can avoid segregation. There is a good social integration between people who comes from different backgrounds, they have different income levels, and of course there are former homeless people living there as well. So I think that's something that I'm really proud of what Helsinki is doing.
No, affordable housing doesn't just appear.
Doesn't just happen.
Somebody's got to pay for it. So
So it's state subsidized when we are building affordable homes. So that state subsidize the interest, and then they guarantee the loans, which we have to take when we are building. And the city plays a role, because the city of Helsinki, for example, they don't sell the land, or very seldom they sell the land. So they usually lease the land. And for us who are building affordable housing, the lease is a little bit lower compared to the private sector, for example. So with these two elements, we are able to keep the rent levels affordable for people.
yeah, that is a big thing here that I've spoken at a few developer conferences, and I've always believed, the more that we can incentivize the building of low-income housing, the more we're going to have low-income housing built.
Yeah.
But we also, here in America, we're not going to be able to build our way out of homelessness. Here in San Francisco, a lot of these buildings are vacant.
Yeah.
And they have to look at maybe they can create affordable housing out of that instead of building a new structure.
Yeah, and that's part of what we did in Finland as well when we started Housing First 2008. We didn't renovate vacant buildings, but we renovate almost all the shelters and temporary accommodation into permanent homes for people. And so I think we need to work what we got.
You guys, I don't know, here we call it a point-in-time count.
Yeah, we did the same.
Okay, and you got some new numbers.
Yeah, new numbers 2 weeks ago, and of course I'm glad to say that the numbers are still going down. So now it's 12 years in a row. So now the official numbers.
Wait. We gotta repeat that. 12 years in a row.
Yes, the number.
Homelessness has decreased.
Yes, that is correct.
12 years.
12 years.
Wow.
Now the number is 3,429 homeless people, out of which around 70% are staying with their friends and relatives. And then the other part, 30%, in shelters, temporary accommodation, and some people on the streets as well. Yeah.
How does Finland define homelessness when you're doing your point-in-time count?
Yeah, well, in Finland, if you don't have a permanent rental agreement of your own, you are considered as a homeless. So that means that...
That's simple?
That's simple. So people who are staying with their friends and relatives, but they would like to live on their own, they are considered as homeless people. People in temporary accommodation, homeless. People in shelters, they are homeless, of course, and people on the streets, they are considered as homeless.
See, we do not consider people that are doubling up or...
Yeah, that's what I heard. Yeah, but in Finland, we consider them as homeless.
Yeah,
because they don't have a home of their own.
For me, when I first arrived... because I came in a little early to get used to the jet lag.
Yeah, that's good.
And I have this thing that I've done to probably, I have a thing that I do, and I've been to over 300 cities, 10 different countries, not including Finland. Finland was the 11th, where I walk around with a bag of socks and I meet new homeless friends. I remember being in Oslo, Norway, and people said, you're not going to see anybody out on the street. And I did.
Yeah.
You know, every place that I've been to, I've seen street homelessness. And I'm walking around Helsinki in the area where we had salmon stew. I don't know what that area is called, but it's like a downtown area.
Yeah, downtown area.
Here in the United States, an area like that would have a lot of homeless people.
Yeah.
And I walked around for 2 or 3 days and didn't see one street homeless person. And it was a great feeling, but it also seemed very surreal, like I was in a movie. We didn't see a homeless person until we went to a day center that you suggested we visit.
Yeah, that is correct. And of course, that thing is, we have many visitors in Finland who come to see the work we are doing, and they always say, but where are all the homeless people? Because there is no one on the streets. And of course, we are really proud of that. And like you said, there are some people who are sleeping on the streets, and of course, the goal is to have none, and so on. But I think that what usually makes people smile.
Well, why I bring it up is because that is a world we could have here in America. We could actually do what you guys are doing. We just lack the political and public will to do it. I love what the one gentleman said from the Salvation Army.
Jari,
first
comes from America,
right? And he spun it around, because what people say here is they say, well, Finland's a small country, right? It's easier for them. And I love what he said is, America's big country. Has all its resources. You could do it.
Yeah, and then, when I looked San Francisco, it's not that much bigger city compared to Helsinki, for example, regarding the population. Not that much.
Yeah.
And compared the number of homeless people.
Oof.
It's a complete different.
Right.
So I think it's possible to do it, and of course people, they can find excuses why not to do it, and why not using the money, why not allocating some of the existing money differently.
Yeah.
So I think there is all the possibilities that in US you can do it, but now of course the political will plays a big role. There's no denial about that. But you never know. You find that one politician who is powerful enough and start advocate the thing, and things can happen.
We got to get Jan to move to America.
Yeah. I like that one. That's a good solution.
For us, that was our first. We've been doing documentaries. We call mini documentaries or shorts for a couple of years, and that was our first longer documentary. Now we've just going to call them all documentaries, but that was the first time we did more of an in-depth story. And now there's cities in America that are reducing homelessness.
Yeah, I read. Yeah.
And we're going to go and highlight their work as a follow-up to Finland, because it is happening here.
Yeah. I read some stuff about Houston and Dallas and these big cities.
Well, we're going to go to the reason, and I'm glad you brought up Houston. Houston has land. It's Texas.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of room. So when people talk about housing first in Houston, it's similar how they talk about housing first in Finland. Houston is able to create housing.
Yeah.
So we're going to go to Hennepin County, which is Minneapolis, to do a follow-up.
That's great. Yeah.
And what tips for those that haven't seen the documentary? I know we're repeating a little bit what we talked about, but what tips or advice would you give to politicians that are listening or watching this on next steps to start creating affordable housing or providing housing first with services?
Yeah, well, I think nowadays the most important thing is that start doing it. Take action. Because
Just do it.
Just do it. Because I think we have so many discussions, we have so many visions, we have so many strategy papers, we have so many words that basically tells the path where we should be going. Now we just need the action part because we're not going to end homelessness without action.
Yeah. Not at all.
Yeah.
And Finland or even Helsinki, I mean, we didn't discuss this at all. So here in America, criminalization is growing. So support is moving away from housing towards criminalization. And I didn't think, as I started asking this question, I answered it myself. You're reducing homelessness,
Yeah.
so there's no need for criminalization.
No, not at all.
Yeah,
it has. I think that's never been discussed publicly. That we
what do
should
you
something
think
like
about
that.
America? How we're moving in a direction of forced internment camps?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit frightening path because once you go there, it can be quite hard to come back.
Right.
And then what I heard yesterday in the conference about the Kentucky situation, where the landowners are basically able to shoot homeless people if they come to their property. So
you can use deadly force if a homeless person is on your lawn.
So that is just unthinkable for me and where I come from.
Yeah.
So I hope that the politicians and the decision makers will think those things again, because once you go there, it's really hard to come back.
It's just crazy where we're going when, there's evidence-based practices such as Finland that are solving homelessness.
Yeah, that is true. I think we have 10,000 studies about housing first and how it's effective and actually can end homelessness and actually saves money while doing it on the long run. Yeah. But people are selfish nowadays. They just think about themselves and out of sight, out of mind.
That's why I push personal benefit messaging.
Yeah, if people would believe on research, we wouldn't have this discussion. So that's where you need strong advocates to push that message through.
Here in America, there's shelter operators like the Salvation Army. Even here, they really push against housing first. Yet shelter operators, including the Salvation Army, and I've traveled all over the world and I've worked with Salvation Army. There's great Salvation Armies. There's Salvation Armies that could improve. Many are stuck on outdated traditions and models. But how did you convince faith-based organizations like the Salvation Army that run a shelter model and have for a long time to transition and convert their shelters to housing units? That's a miracle.
I think miracle is a good word. They had a long traditions running the biggest shelter in the Northern Europe, which was located in Helsinki, and on the peak days there was 400 bed places, and when we started housing first, I think it was around 250 bed places. It was a long discussions. It took around 18 months to convince them that this is the right thing to do, and of course they had some problems, that people can drink or use drugs in the apartments that they own. So that was the biggest thing. But then there was this gentle political push as well. So the city of Helsinki thought that, you can either do the renovation into individual apartments, or then if you don't do it, we won't buy any services from you because we want to do the full systemic change to housing first. Them. Yeah, but there was the carrot as well. So the state came when the renovation cost was, a lot of money. So the state guaranteed some of that.
From my experience of visiting, I think we visited 2 facilities, and some of my favorite quotes from the documentary come from people that work at the Salvation Army, where they're talking about unconditional love. Yeah. The one woman even says, "You'll never get so low that we won't walk beside you." Yeah, and I get chills. It's so wonderful. Yeah, but so even the harm reduction, right? The low barrier, the Salvation Army changed.
Yeah, for sure, and you're completely right. I think it was Merja, the social worker, who said those words, and she's a really great person. And but that is correct. But I think that's what Housing First should be all about. What she just said.
Yeah.
You can't go low enough, but we are always there for you, walking beside you, supporting you, no matter what.
No matter what.
Exactly.
The other thing that really struck me of the model, each person is like a normal person in they have to have a lease that is respected, just like you would.
Just like I have.
Just like you have. Because we didn't put it in the documentary to keep it shorter.
Yeah.
So it wasn't this big, long piece. But the Blue Ribbon Foundation actually wanted us to talk about drug dealing in Housing First. Their response was, we don't support it. We don't agree with it. But it's that person's apartment. And they have a lease and a right to privacy.
Yes.
And you look out here in San Francisco or Atlanta or Tampa, Florida, there's people in every apartment building and every suburban neighborhood that are dealing drugs. And yes, it shouldn't be, but it is, right? And they still retain some privacy and some human rights, but there's something about homeless people that, okay, you're less than human, you shouldn't have these rights.
Yeah, that is correct. And I have just put a picture onto Twitter and I have pinned it, which explains the Finnish Housing First model. There are 6 points, and number 6, which basically wraps around it together, is the normality. So just what you said, people have normal rental agreements.
Yeah.
They have right to privacy. They use the same health and social services as anyone else, can claim the same benefits. Normal citizens, part of the communities, part of the neighborhoods. And I think that makes a big difference compared to what you just said. You know, some people, when they come to work in the homelessness sector in Finland, they might feel that, why are these people able to drink in their own homes? And we have this very, very good development network in Finland regarding Housing First, and they have training sessions. One of the training sessions is about rental agreements. And there is this, our Y Foundation lawyer actually, who's really good explaining the thing, and he always asks the question that, how many people have a glass of wine or beer every now and then all the people raise their hands up. Exactly. Right. Why shouldn't these people be allowed to do those things as well?
I have a friend who does amazing work on Skid Row. Her name's Jen. We featured them in another documentary, Sidewalk Project, and we're talking about supervised consumption sites, and people are against that. And well, that's what a bar is. It's a supervised consumption site. Now, one of the things that I was really impressed with, and probably the hardest thing for America to duplicate of your model, was a commitment and a culture to improve. Because you guys accepted there's problems and it's not perfect, so let's improve. For example, the outreach workers said, we do this report that goes to our boss, to the politicians, and to the media at the same time.
Exactly.
I don't ever see that happening here, right? But it shows that you want to improve, because they're saying, when somebody gets removed from Housing First, and there's a process, they don't go immediately to the streets.
No.
Here they do. You try to create a safety net so that they don't, but sometimes it does happen. But you have the outreach team giving suggestions on how you can improve Housing First so that doesn't happen.
Yeah, they do that. And then, of course, overall in the Housing First, we have developed the model all the time. So when we started 2008, the goal was to end long-term homelessness. And then we realized that when we have done 8 years of that work, that, but we are at the same time, we need to prevent actually coming into homelessness. So we started a program, and the goal was to prevent homelessness altogether, and we developed different models for that. So I think it has always been this idea in the Finnish context that we are never ready. The homelessness changes, people changes, world changes. You never know. There has been COVID, now there's a war in Europe, so many things can happen. So we need to prepare, and we need to develop our work as well in the meantime.
Can you explain Housing First 2.0?
I think it's more of an evolution than a revolution, to be honest. But, I hope that someday in Finland we have social enterprises that, former homeless people and current homeless people can run coffee shops and maybe restaurants and different kind of things. And then that there would be even better integration between social and health services and these kind of things. And one of the things that we have actually done regarding Housing First 2.0 is these mobile multi-professional teams. So they are now running in different cities in Finland.
You've already prioritized the person over housing placement. And Housing 2.0 is helping that person thrive, not just survive, but then they have a better chance of restabilizing and going back into society. So what people don't know, I forget her name, the woman in the pink.
Tuija.
Yeah. She's wonderful.
She's great.
But she was leaving Housing First.
Yeah.
Because she went into Housing First. She got sober on her own. Now that she had a home, she didn't have the trauma of homelessness and decided, gosh, I don't need these drugs to escape. Then she was in the housing program for a while, and she's gotten to a point where she feels, emotionally and physically and probably even spiritually well enough to go out on her own. And that, to me, is the transition to Housing 2.0 because it will help people do that. Why we need to do that? Well, there's a couple of reasons. The number one is the person itself. They're going to be healthier and better. But then it opens up an apartment. It opens up a room for somebody else.
Yeah, that is correct. And, usually we get the questions when people go see these units and Tuija's apartment, for example, and then they explain that, you can live there basically forever. And even though if you don't need support, you have a permanent rental agreement. And then people always ask the question that, is there many people who don't need the support and are living in the units? Well, no. The reality is that when people like Tuija, when they don't need the support anymore, they have been working outside the unit for a while, they tend to move somewhere else with a lighter support. And that's how it goes. I just love Tuija. She's such a great personality.
Amazing. She's just so amazing. Anything you'd like to add?
We need to take action, like I said, and like was mentioned in Anna's opening speech yesterday's conference. I think that's an important message so that we can make sure that, housing will not be a privilege of the few, but a human right for all.
If you had 3 wishes, what would they be?
Action, action, action.
You're an action man.
Yes, I am, pretty much.
Well, thank you very much for spending more time with me.
Hey, it's always a pleasure, Mark.
We got to go on and do this on a stage.
Yeah. 500 people coming there, so yeah.
Is it 500?
Yeah.